All right. Our next speaker is going to be talking a little bit about groundwater modeling in the Sprague River. And so we have Ronan Igloria going to present some information about that. So thank you, Ronan, for coming down. All right. You can use this for pointing things out.
Okay.
And then you can advance slides with the mouse or the.
All right, cool. All right, thank you, Randy. When Randy started the meeting, he was asking about who had been, I think, at the first KBMP meeting, and I raised my hand. I misheard him. This is actually my first meeting, and so I appreciate the opportunity to present this information and this project. Eli Sarian actually was involved in this project and kind of plugged me in the project and with the group, so appreciate that. So switching gears a little bit, we're still in the Upper Klamath, evaluating floodplain restoration reconnection opportunities with a Sprague River Basin groundwater model. Again, I'm Ronan Igloria. I'm with GSI Water Solutions. We don't do a lot of work down in the Klamath, but we did a previous project looking at storage opportunities in the Upper Klamath Basin, and that's how we got plugged in with the Klamath Tribes. And they reached out to us, and we helped secure a drought resiliency grant back in 2022, and this is sort of the work around that. We just wrapped up the project a year ago about this time with the report. So I'll kind of provide a high-level overview of that project with a focus on the groundwater modeling aspect. But we did have a great core team. My background's in civil engineering, and I do a lot of water supply projects. So my expertise isn't necessarily in the areas that I'll be covering, a lot of geomorphology, restoration, and groundwater modeling, but I got to work with a great bunch of folks on this project. So GSI was responsible for the water modeling piece. Wolf Water Resources did a lot of the floodplain evaluation and work around that. Eli was here, part of the team, just really knowledgeable about the basin and a lot of the data that's around the basin. We were able to take advantage of that. We have folks on the modeling side, Environmental Simulations Inc. Incorporated, and Geosystems Analysis, just helping with the work. So I wanted to acknowledge those folks. So real quick, I'll try to cover these things relatively quickly. I got about 15 minutes or so. So just go over the objectives and the scope of the work, talk a little bit about the actual groundwater model development, analysis, and some of the limitations. With any modeling work, there's limitations on that, so I'll highlight those things. And then some of the findings and some of the opportunities with the modeling tool that's available. If there's anything to kind of take away from the talk, I think it's really just an awareness that there's this model that's been developed as part of this project that has a lot of capabilities, still some room to definitely improve it, but there's a tool that's out there that can be used for a lot of different applications, and potentially just expanding the geographic extent of it. This is focused on the Sprague, but there's, the process that we followed in the project. I think there's opportunities for other parts of the Klamath. So, like I mentioned, we worked with the Klamath Tribes, Ambadat Department, Mark Buechner, and Shawnee Rich and Brad Parrish. If you folks know any of those guys, that's who we worked with at the Tribes, Klamath Tribes. Unfortunately, we didn't finish this project before Mark retired. We were kind of midway through it. But it was great working with those guys. The focus of the work is restoration treatment. So it's really floodplain reconnection, more towards kind of the water quality or water quantity side of the things. Of course, like Randy mentioned, there's this connection with water quality, obviously with improved water quantity and flows in the streams. But it was really looking at what's the storage opportunities, to increase groundwater storage with floodplain reconnection, so that later in the summer periods, you can get some additional discharge and increased flows. That was kind of the focus. It was a drought resiliency grant, so there was a lot of water quantity focus on the work. So this is the study area, Sprague River Basin, North and South Forks, past Lower Sycan River, and then all the way out to the Williamson River where it connects. You can see here the 12 or so different reaches that were part of the study. We kind of stuck with the reach definitions that O'Connor in 2015 defined, and we based the study and evaluation around those reaches. So yeah, that's and part of the approach was looking at the types of reaches and the floodplain conditions that we would then evaluate in the modeling analysis. So again, this was the focus of the work that Wolf Water Resources was involved in. They did a lot of literature review, looking at previous work, but really their focus was understanding what the floodplain conditions were along the Sprague River. Fortunately, at that time, Fish and Wildlife, US Fish and Wildlife had just collected a very robust LiDAR data set in, I think, late 2022. So that just became available just as we were going to start the project. And so we were able to take advantage of that. So we had 1 foot interval LiDAR data. They were able to create this relative elevation model to be able to look at pretty robust characteristics of just the floodplains and connectivity, opportunities for connectivity. So they did that connectivity analysis looking at different return flows and how the water would connect and flow throughout the reach of the Sprague River. And they used that analysis to help prioritize kind of where to apply different treatment types. And then we use that information to figure out, okay, how are we going to model and what are we going to model with the tool that was being developed. So based on that analysis that Wolf Water did, we decided to focus on these 3 particular reaches and these 3 particular types of or sort of categories of reconnection treatment types. The first is a side channel reconnection with a socially canyon, dike road removal due to the God's Reach, and then this channel bed raising on Beta Gap. And those are sort of representative. We could look at those in other reaches, but that was sort of a delineation, an easy way to kind of sort of categorize the way we were going to analyze the treatment types, and priorities, and then extrapolate that out potentially to the other reaches based on some of the lessons that we've learned through the analysis. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit to the actual model. So we started with the Upper Klamath Basin groundwater model, the regional groundwater model that USGS developed back in 2012. It was a regional model, so with a regional model, the scales, the scale of the model development is different than what we're interested in, where we're looking more on that reach level. So there was a lot of work to repurpose and sort of upgrade and change the focus of that model. I'll go over this real quick in a minute or two, and it really did take probably easily 6 to 7 to 8 months to make that conversion of this regional model into a model that we could use for the Sprague Basin itself and on that reach level, and trying to take into account the sort of the groundwater surface water interaction, right, with these floodplain reconnection project concepts. One of the biggest challenges with the model is there's just not that much documentation, right? So there's a lot of work figuring out, digging into the model itself. The scale in terms of like the cell grid on the regional model is about 2,500 foot cell grids. We ended up converting that down to about 300 feet. So the scaling was much different. There's also availability of data from groundwater elevation, stream flows. There's limitations on that. So the calibration process took some creativity, so a little bit of extrapolation in that process. The figure on the right, to your right, shows the new tool that we use. So MODFLOW. This is based off of MODFLOW. The regional model is based off of USGS MODFLOW. That always changes, and so the version that we used was the UGS, and there was a Groundwater Vistas sort of graphical user interface that was really helpful in running this analysis and just visualizing the work. So I'll get into a little bit of some of the specific changes just so you have that in context. So I already mentioned changing the grid size from 2,500 to about 300 foot. So refining the sort of the resolution of the model. I mentioned the LiDAR data, so that was very useful in terms of again, discrete elevation information that we were able to use. The other part of it was because this was a regional model, the previous model, the hydrogeologic units that were in there were pretty generic, right? And because we were interested in the floodplain interaction piece, we wanted to try to get that superficial alluvium into a more sort of accurate and ability to sort of model the more the nuances within the surface water and groundwater interaction at that shallower level. There's still a lot of assumptions around that superficial thickness assumption, so that's one of the things we'll point out at the end in terms of some limitations. The other key piece here was this CLN. I'm not a groundwater model, like I mentioned, so the connected linear network is just basically a new modeling tool that allowed us to really look at the tributary interactions, that surface water groundwater interaction in a much more fine basis. And then the other thing I mentioned was just the recharge rates and aquifer parameters. So that was all updated as part of the modeling process and update. Okay, so just get a little bit more into the treatment types themselves. So I mentioned these were kind of the 3 treatment categories that we looked at. Wolf Water helped define these and identify, which reaches to work on. But so the channel bed raise on Beta Gap, that involves raising the incised channel to become more in line with the floodplain. And then within the model itself, it's really just increasing the elevation of that river channel bed within the model. We generalize it by just assuming a 50% increase from the bottom of the channel to the bank elevation. So just a kind of a generic increase whenever we were applying that channel bed raise treatment. On the dike and road removal for the View of the Gods, that was basically removing topographic impediments to overbank flows. So if there's a roadway embankment, we would just remove that basically, and so that allow that connection on the floodplain. And then lastly, the side channel reconnection on the Social East Canyon. So that's basically creating the surface water connections between the river and side channel. So it allows the flows to basically reach those side channels along the floodplain. And that's really within the model, just basically using that CLN tool, just allowing that connection between the main stem channel and these side channels. So the actual modeling analysis, kind of obviously with any model, you have to go through a calibration process. So that was a major step. There were kind of 2 sub-steps as part of that to create this sort of baseline model for the analysis. We had, I think it was like 1970 to 2004 sort of hydrology data set, and that was on a quarterly basis, right? That was the hydrologic record. And so we went through a calibration process on that level first, that full period of record. But then knowing that, well, we went through some preliminary analysis, and with those quarterly time steps in the model, it doesn't capture the changes with the peak flow, the seasonal peak flows. And so we decided to narrow down the actual analysis window to a 2-year simulation with daily time steps. So there was a step going through that process. And so when we did the actual comparisons of a treatment versus the baseline, that was the basis that we were looking at, this 2-year window with daily time steps. We can get that, be able to capture those peak flows and sort of the daily flow conditions. So that the period we used there was like 92 to 94, I believe, 1992 to 94. And that captured kind of a higher flow season and then a lower flow season, so we can catch that sort of range. The analysis itself, we ran the baseline model with no treatment and then compared that to the treatment types for those 3 reaches, basically looking at groundwater elevation changes, hydrographs with and without that treatment type for that particular reach. And then we were also looking at the inflow and outflow along that reach to do that comparison. How much does the flow change and how does that groundwater level change with those 2 different treatment or those different treatment scenarios to give us that sort of storage volume, to be able to quantify that storage volume. Just to get a flavor for some of the results, so I'll just focus on the Beta Gap channel bed raising scenarios that we looked at. So again, this was channel bed raising, so we were increasing the elevation and roughness of the river channel to be able to account for that treatment type. And what we found was basically increased recharge of peak runoff and increased groundwater storage. So by increasing that elevation and allowing that opportunity to recharge along the river channel, we did observable quantities of additional recharge, and then that groundwater storage being basically held for a amount of time so that you can see that later in the season. You can see here groundwater levels adjacent to the river increased along the reach 4 to 6 feet. Kind of not consistent throughout, but generally that's the kind of the range of increased elevations during that period. This is just another graphic example. So you can kind of see the dots there on the right along the floodplain areas. Those are just the colors represent the amount of water level elevation change, and we basically use that change in area to estimate kind of a storage volume. And you can see kind of the difference in the groundwater levels there on that graph to the left. And that was again through the couple year period there that we ran the analysis. And just for the sake of time, this is kind of just a summary of what we saw with the baseline versus project effects. Again, beta gap, we just went through that. There was a persistent increase in the groundwater recharge and storage, and an increase in summer flow. So there was an actual observable persistence in that groundwater storage. So that later in the season, you can actually observe that in the simulated stream flows. For the other two, the Social Canyon and the Butte of the Gods with dike road and side channel reconnection, we did observe some change in the storage, but it didn't last very long. So it just kind of like it stored the water and then it just released within a shorter amount of time. So you can see that sort of benefit later in the season. So that's kind of an important observation. I just wanted to point that out. But here's kind of just a summary of the recommendations itself. And again, this is taking a look at both the modeling results and kind of just a general review of the floodplain reconnection opportunities that Wolf Water and had kind of reviewed. So prioritizing upstream reaches to maximize benefits and get that benefit for the whole basin. We did find the channel bed raise treatments in the confined reaches provided that better sort of sustained recharge benefit. Not so much with the levee and road removal, but focusing those on broad valleys would be a good thing to prioritize. And again, we only did these for 3 reaches, so there's opportunities to look at this kind of analysis for the other reaches on the Sprague. It would be good to point out that the analysis and the way the model's built is more for sort of relative comparison. So it's useful for this kind of prioritization process. It's not quite to the level of predictive modeling at this point, so I just wanted to make sure to point that out, and I'm sure I'll bring that up again here later. Again, here, so with based on these model limitations, that's where the comparative piece is kind of where the usefulness of the tool is at this point. There is limited groundwater level data, so from the calibration process, there's a lot to still kind of refine the model based on better data for calibration process. The runoff, the recharge and runoff is kind of data. So, there's some, I don't know if that's been ongoing since we've done the work, but being able to have that data available will also improve some of the calibration and reduce some of the uncertainty. The other piece is even though we reduced the grid size on the model, it's still at 300 by 300 feet. So some of the restoration, reconnection type projects, whether it's with the road and dike removals or those kinds of the reconnection projects, the scale can be oftentimes less than that, right? So there's further refinement of the grid cell that can be done on the project or on the model. And then so just to kind of wrap it up, just opportunities for the groundwater model itself. It's a very sophisticated model with all the refinements that we made in there. The CLN tool is really useful for being able to look at groundwater surface water interaction. But as I mentioned, it's still at that level of sort of that exploration comparative versus predictive. So we're still at that sort of comparative basis for the model. With some of these refinements, I think we can get to more of that predictive approach. And I already mentioned some of this, so refining the calibration, getting better estimates of recharge, and then doing some more sensitivity analysis of the model parameters. So again, kind of just to wrap up the work we did and under this project, I think developed this tool that's going to be useful. It can be very useful. Can use a little more refinement, but I think it's a tool that can have a lot of opportunities for broader use throughout the basin. So I think I'm at my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronan. We have time for a question or two. Just real quick, do you think this model is going to be really helpful in terms of guiding, in-stream restoration efforts and kind of managing the overall use of groundwater in the system?
I think so. In fact, as we were wrapping up the project last summer, we were starting to engage with the Klamath Tribes and some of the other projects and entities that were doing some restoration work, wanting to explore what the model capabilities are and start to think about how that model can be used in some of their project work. Some of the funding and things kind of just leveled off, and so things slow down. But I think there's interest in further using and developing the capabilities of the model.
Super fascinating and very relevant to a lot of issues here. So thank you. The question is, it looked to me like your analysis was agnostic of on-the-ground realities. You weren't trying to temper in anything like landowner willingness. Is that correct?
That's correct for this. Although at the start of the project, we went out to kind of scoped out the whole area. We talked with the tribes. We were with the staff and kind of did the walk of the whole Sprague River and some of the tributaries. And they were pointing out, opportunities for which landowner and which potential projects are out there. So that was on the list. But in terms of where we were with the project, I think that's kind of where the tribes want to take it. They've got some projects kind of in the works, or at least conceptualized, and seeing how the prioritization process that we went through on that sort of concept level and that scale could be used in terms of where they're talking to and finding potential on the ground projects from interested landowners.
Okay, so kind of a follow-up question with the channel bed elevation, which it was really interesting seeing, the differences between the proposed actions. But with that channel bed elevation, would you be able to analyze the effects on the, standing water on the nearby lands and how long it would be there and what increased inundation duration and so on would be present?
Yeah, the one usefulness of the tool is you can make changes in a certain reach or certain segment, right? And then you can observe the changes upstream, downstream, kind of just not local to that area. So we did actually do that. One of the recommendations was, if you can implement one of those channel bed raising projects on a kind of a narrower incised channel, do it downstream of kind of more of a valley area, you actually get a lot of benefit because you're able to sort of back up the water and store it and then allow that to release. But again, it's sort of like limited by the model's resolution, right, still. And so ground truthing that, being able to focus in on a specific reach is definitely needed before going too far.
Have you looked at the possibility of trying to couple your mod flow with some type of HEC-RES to kind of look at some of that surface variability and impact?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. Part of the limitation that we had still was just sort of the amount of data that was available. I think as the surface water stream flow monitoring data and sort of the ability to refine some of the groundwater piece, definitely some potential for looking at that surface water HEC-RES link.
Well, Ronan, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I also appreciate a good modeling talk that doesn't go so deep in the weeds of the models that we all are like, oh my God, what's happening here? Keeping it at a nice high level. So I appreciate that. For all of us non-modelers. All right.